They laughed at the old woman on aisle 9 for kneeling too slow to lift a case of soup. They did not know the gray-haired bagger had run a casualty collection point under mortar fire, and that by noon she would be the only thing standing between 40 people and the worst day of their lives. Her name was Margaret Hale, and most of the store called her Maggie, and a few of the younger ones did not call her anything at all, because to them she was furniture. She was 61 years old. She wore a plain dark green apron with her first name printed on a strip of tape, because nobody had bothered to order her a real badge in the 4 months she had worked there. She moved through the store the way a tide moves, slow and certain and easy to ignore, and the morning the gas line let go, she was exactly where they always put her, down on one knee at the bottom shelf, restocking cans by hand because the new manager said she was too slow for the registers during a rush. The case of soup was heavier than it should have been, or her knees were older than they used to be, and it took her 2 breaths to set it down instead of 1. That was all. 2 breaths. And from the end of the aisle a young man named Dylan, 22, lanky, a smear of a beard he was proud of, leaned on his cart and said it loud enough to carry. "Careful, Grandma. You'll throw your hip out and we'll have to call somebody." The kid beside him laughed. A customer pretended not to hear and steered her cart the other way. Maggie did not look up. She set the last can in line, label out, the way she set everything, square and deliberate, and she breathed once, slow, and reached into the front pocket of her apron the way some people touch a wedding ring when they are tired. There was a strap in that pocket, faded olive fabric, frayed at the edges, a short metal rod sewn into a loop at one end. It was older than Dylan. It was older than the store. Most of the crew had seen it at one point or another, when she set it on the break room table, or when it slipped half out as she bent, and exactly one of them had ever asked her what it was, and that was Rosa on the registers, who was 54 and had raised 3 kids and could read a person across a room. The rest of them, when they noticed it at all, decided it was a luggage strap or a dog leash or some old lady thing, and they were wrong, and being wrong about Maggie Hale was, on most days, free. It cost them nothing. The store ran, the carts rolled, the doors slid open and shut on their rubber tracks, and the slow woman on aisle 9 stocked her cans and was invisible, and that was the arrangement, and everyone was comfortable inside it. Dylan pushed his cart past her and clipped her heel with the wheel, not quite an accident, and said, "On your left, Grandma," and she let it go, because she had let bigger things go, and because the thing about being underestimated, the thing none of them understood, is that it is a kind of quiet. People who think you are nothing stop watching you. They say things in front of you they would never say in front of someone they respected. They leave doors open. They leave themselves open. And Maggie, who had spent a long life being told to step aside by men who were sure of themselves, had learned to live inside that quiet the way you learn to live inside any weather. She did not need them to see her. She needed the soup squared and the shelf full and the shift over, and she needed the strap in her pocket, though she could not have told you why she still carried it after all these years, only that the morning she stopped would be the morning she would need it. If you have ever watched someone good get treated like they were nothing and felt that quiet anger that has nowhere to go, then you already understand why I tell these stories, and you already belong on this channel. Take 1 second to subscribe, because Unspoken Valor exists for exactly that feeling and exactly these people, the ones the room writes off, the ones who turn out to be the only thing holding the room up. The folks who do are the ones who stay for the part where the world finally finds out who it has been ignoring, and that part is coming, and I do not want you to miss it. Because what happened to Maggie Hale that morning is the kind of thing that, if you had seen it, you would never have walked past a slow old woman the same way again. The store was a big one. a wide, bright box at the edge of a small city, and on a Saturday in late spring it filled up by 9 the way a bathtub fills, slow and then all at once. Adults with lists, adults with kids in the cart and earbuds in and nowhere particular to be, retirees who came for the company as much as the groceries and lingered by the bakery counter, 2 registers open and a line at each, Rosa working one and a tired young woman named Priya working the other, and the new manager up in the glass office that overlooked the floor, watching the lines and the clock and the labor numbers on his screen, because that was what he watched. His name was Brett Coyle. He was 44. He had come in 3 months ago from a chain 2 states over with a reputation for tightening up underperforming locations, which meant he cut hours, and he had cut Maggie's first, from 5 shifts to 3, and he had told her so in the office with the door open and a smile on his face. Nothing personal, Margaret. The metrics just don't support a stalker at your, pace. He had let the word hang there, pace, like a man setting down something he wanted everyone to smell. She had said, "Okay," because that was usually all she said, and she had gone back to the floor, and he had decided from that day that she was beaten, that she had heard him and folded, and he had filed her underdone, the way he filed everything, and he had moved on to the next number. What Brett Coyle did not file, because it did not show up on any screen he watched, was the smell that had been hanging at the front of the store since a little before 8 that morning. Faint, sweetish, a breath of it near register 4, gone when you turned your head, back when you turned it again. The maintenance man had logged a rotten egg odor, intermittent front of house 2 weeks earlier, and Brett had read the work order and seen the cost of having the gas company out to chase a phantom, and written in the box, "Monitor," and closed it, because the metrics did not support a service call for a smell nobody could pin down. He had done the same with the fire panel a month before that, when its sensitive head sensors kept tripping the alarm during the morning bread bake and emptying his store of paying customers twice in 1 week. He had a man come out and adjust it, which in practice meant put it in a test bypass and never take it out, because an alarm that does not go off does not lose you customers, and the metrics did not support a fire panel that cried wolf. He had solved both problems the same way. He had made the warnings stop. He was very good at making warnings stop. It was, in a sense, his entire professional skill, and on an ordinary day it looked like competence, and that morning was the last ordinary day that store would ever have. Maggie finished aisle 9 and pushed her cart toward the back for another pallet, and as she passed register 4, she slowed, half a step, the way a horse slows at a gait it does not like. She did not think the word gas. She did not think any word. Something at the base of her skull, some old animal that had been awake in worse rooms than this one, simply turned its head toward the front of the store and held still for a moment, and then she shook it off because she was tired and her knees hurt, and there was a pallet in the back with her name on it, more or less, the tape kind of name. But the strap in her pocket felt heavier for a second, or she imagined it did, and she would think about that later, on the days when she let herself think about it at all, that her body had known before she did. It always had. That was the thing about her that none of them could see, and that no metric could measure. She noticed things. She had spent her whole life noticing the one thing in the room that was about to go wrong, and being right and being thanked for it by people who forgot her face by morning, and she had made a kind of peace with that, the way you make peace with a debt that will never be paid. So 3 months Brett Coyle had been turning off warnings, and 4 months Maggie Hale had been carrying a strap in her pocket that nobody understood, and one Saturday morning those 2 facts were going to meet at the front of a crowded grocery store. But to understand the hour that was coming, you have to understand the years that made her, and the only way Maggie ever let those years out was in pieces, never all at once, never as a speech, because she was not a woman who explained herself. The story came out sideways. It came out the way it always came out, in the small things her hands did without being told, and in the one line Rosa said about her, once, in the break room, to a new hire who had asked why the old lady got left alone. Rosa had looked up from her crossword and said, simple as weather, because that woman has seen things you and I will never see, and she carries them so quiet you'd never know. Leave her be. The new hire had not understood. Almost nobody did. They would, though. By the end of that Saturday, every soul in that building would understand exactly what Rosa meant, and some of them would spend the rest of their lives trying to thank a woman who did not want to be thanked. Here is what they did not know about the slow woman on aisle 9. 40 years before that Saturday, when she was barely out of her teens, Margaret Hale had put on a uniform of a very different color and learned a trade that the people in that store could not have imagined. She had been a combat nurse, not the version in the movies with the music swelling, the real version, the one with the smell and the noise and the math, the brutal arithmetic of too many wounded and not enough hands, where you learn in your first week that the most important skill you will ever have is not saving a life, but deciding, in 4 seconds, with no time and no second chance, which lives can wait and which cannot. They call it triage. It is the coldest, kindest thing a human being can do, and it has to be done by someone whose hands do not shake and whose heart does not argue. And Maggie had done it at a forward aid station while the ground jumped, and she had done it well, and she had a tattoo on the inside of her left forearm, faded now to the color of an old bruise that told you which unit she had done it with, if you knew how to read it, and a thin white scar above it from a day she did not talk about. She had run casualty collection points. She had taught younger medics how to sort the living. She had held a stranger's chest closed with her 2 hands and her whole weight while the helicopter came, and she had lost some, more than some, and she had learned the lesson that sat under everything else she ever did, the one she would say to herself the morning the gas line blew. The way you say a prayer you no longer believe but cannot stop. Systems fail, people save people. The walls do not save you. The alarms do not save you. The number on the screen does not save you. A person decides to move, or no one does. She had come home from all of it the way her whole generation of women in that work came home, which is to say without a parade, into a country that had a hard time looking at her, and she had married a good, quiet man and raised the noise of an ordinary life over the top of the other thing, and she had worked as a civilian nurse for 30 years, floors and clinics, and a long stretch in an emergency department where the younger doctors slowly figured out that the calm older RN in the corner was the person you wanted in the room when everything came apart at once. And then her husband had gotten sick, the long, expensive kind of sick, and the savings had gone the way savings go, and after he passed there were the bills, the ones that do not care that you spent your life caring for other people, and her pension was not what it should have been, and her own body had started filing its complaints, the knees, the shoulder that ached where the scar was, and the nursing license had lapsed in the worst 2 years when she could not afford the renewal and did not have it in her to walk back onto a hospital floor where everyone she had trained was now in charge. So at 61, a woman who had decided who lived and who waited while the world burned took the only job she could get that her body could still do most days, stocking shelves at $11 an hour, and a 44-year-old man who had never once in his life had to make a 4-second decision that mattered looked at her pace and decided she was finished, and a 22-year-old called her grandma, and she let them, because she had learned that the people who need to tell you that you are nothing are usually telling you something about themselves, and because the work was honest and she was glad to have it, and because somewhere under all of it she was tired, bone tired, the particular tiredness of a person who has carried other people her whole life and would like, just once, to be allowed to be ordinary. But you do not get to choose the morning. That is the other thing she knew that they did not. You do not get to decide that today you are just a tired old woman stocking soup. The morning decides. And on this one, while Brett Coyle watched his labor numbers and Dylan filmed himself doing something stupid by the dairy case for an app, and the line at Rosa's register grew to 6 carts deep, and a young father near the front lifted his toddler into the seat and reached for the cereal his kid was pointing at, the Swedish smell at Register 4 stopped being intermittent. It stopped, and that was the danger. That was the thing only Maggie's old animal would have understood if it had been given one more minute. A smell that goes away because the leak has slowed is one thing, but a smell that goes away because the air is now so full of it that your nose has quit on you is another thing entirely. And there is no warning between the two except the one your body gives you, and Brett Coyle had turned off every warning in the building that did not come from his own good sense, and his own good sense was upstairs looking at a screen. Maggie was at the back breaking down a pallet when it happened. And so she lived, and so 40 people lived, because the thing that should have killed first reached the front of the store before it reached her, and the front of the store is where the leak was, and the front of the store is where the people were. She had just bent for a case of canned tomatoes, and her hand was on the box, and her body, that old traitor that had never once been wrong, went rigid before her mind caught up. She lifted her head. She breathed in through her nose, hard, the way you do when you are checking, and there was nothing, no smell at all, and that was wrong. That was so wrong, because there should have been the bread and the floor cleaner and the cold, dry breath of the freezer aisle, and instead there was nothing, a dead flat nothing. And the last clear thought Margaret Hale had before the world tore in half was not a word, but a door slamming open in the back of her mind, a door she had bolted shut 40 years ago, and behind it stood the young woman she used to be, already moving, already counting, and Maggie Hale, 61, on one knee in the back of a grocery store, dropped the case of tomatoes and opened her mouth to shout a warning that was already too late. The explosion did not sound the way people think an explosion sounds. There was no movie boom. There was a soft, enormous thud that she felt in her chest before she heard it, a pressure that came down the aisles like a wave coming down a hallway, and then the front third of the store simply changed. The big plate windows at the front did not shatter outward in a neat sheet. They came apart into a glittering haze that hung in the sunlight for a strange long second, and the front displays went over, and the registers jumped, and a wall of warm air shoved Maggie back onto her heels and put her hand down flat on the floor to keep from going over entirely. Cans came off the shelves around her and rolled. A light fixture 2 aisles up swung and rained little pieces of plastic. And then, after the pressure, came the sound she would actually remember, which was not the blast at all, but the silence right behind it, a held, ringing, underwater silence, 2 full seconds, where the whole store seemed to be deciding whether what had just happened had really happened. And in that silence before the screaming started, while everyone else in that building was still frozen in the doorway of their own disbelief, Margaret Hale was already up off the floor and moving toward the front, toward the smoke and the down people, and the thing everyone else was running away from, because 40 years ago someone had trained the running away out of her and trained something else in, and it had never left. It had only been waiting, patient as a stone, for the morning the room finally needed it. She moved up the main aisle against the first of the people who could still run, and they came at her in a stumbling panic. An adult man with blood sheeting from his scalp and his hands out in front of him like he was walking in the dark. A woman in a cardigan dragging another woman by the wrist. 2 college-age kids in aprons, store crew, white-faced, one of them sobbing the same word over and over. They flowed past her toward the back and the loading doors, and that was right, that was good. The ones who can walk should walk, get them out, clear the floor for the ones who cannot. And some old quartermaster part of her was already tallying them as they passed. Walking wounded, walking wounded, walking, and not one of them looked at the gray-haired woman going the wrong way because people in the first seconds of a catastrophe see only the exit. And so once again, one last time, Maggie Hale was invisible, and once again it was a gift, because no one tried to stop her. No one grabbed her arm and told her she was too old to be running toward that, and so she got to the front of the store while the smoke was still deciding which way to go, and she stopped, and she looked, and she saw it the way she had been trained to see it, all at once, the whole field. Before her heart was allowed to say a single word about it, it was bad. The professional part of her registered that the way you register weather, flatly, usefully, without flinching, because flinching costs seconds and seconds our lives. The front end of the store was a wreckage of overturned carts and toppled displays and a snow of paper and broken product, and there was smoke, gray and low, not the black, roiling kind that means a building is going up, but the dirty haze of a flash and a small fire somewhere near where the registers had been, and there was daylight pouring in sideways through the ruined front wall, and there were people on the floor. She did not let herself count them as people yet. She counted them as a problem, which is the only way the mind survives the first look, down and not moving, 3 that she could see, down and moving, more, many more, sitting up dazed, crawling, holding parts of themselves, calling out, standing but useless, a half-dozen adults rooted where they stood with their hands over their mouths, the bystanders, the frozen ones, and her eye went to them the way a foreman's eye goes to idle hands, because the frozen ones were not victims. The frozen ones were her workforce, if she could thaw them. Behind her somewhere a fire alarm should have been screaming, and sprinklers should have been raining, and a calm, recorded voice should have been telling everyone to walk to the nearest exit, and there was none of that. There was nothing. The ceiling was dry, and the panel was dark and silent, and Maggie did not yet know why, but she knew what it meant. It meant the only system left in this building was the one standing in her own 2 shoes, and she had been that system before. God help her. She had been the only system in worse rooms than this, and so she took one breath, one, all the way down, the breath she had taught 100 younger medics to take before they touched the first patient, and then Margaret Hale stopped being a tired old woman who stocked shelves and became the most dangerous thing in that store, which was a calm person who knew exactly what to do. "Hey!" Her voice came out of her, and it was not loud exactly, but it cut, the way a voice cuts when it has given orders in worse noise than this, when it has been heard over rotors and over screaming and over the worst sounds a human body can make. It landed on the nearest frozen bystander, a heavy-set man in his 50s in a windbreaker, and it took hold of him because a calm, clear voice in a panicked room is the most powerful sound there is. The human animal will follow it like water runs downhill. "You, yes, you, what's your name?" Not a question, really, a handhold. The man said, "Tate, Tom." And she said, "Tom, good, I need you, come here." And she had him. She had turned a frozen man into a working man in 4 words, and that was the first save of the morning, and no one would ever count it, but it was the one that made all the others possible. "Tom, that man by the cart, the one holding his arm, I need you to bring him to me, right here. You carry him or you walk him, but he comes here. Go." And Tom went because she had made it simple, because in the middle of chaos she had handed him exactly one thing to do, and a person who has one clear thing to do is no longer drowning. She turned and found the next pair of frozen hands, a young woman in workout clothes with her phone still up, filming, the way people do now, and Maggie did not waste a breath being angry about it. She used it. "You, put the phone in your pocket, you'll want both hands. What's your name?" Becca. Becca, are you hurt? A shake of the head. Then you're with me. See those people sitting up over there by the bread? I need you to go to each one and ask them two things. Can you walk, and where does it hurt? Don't help them yet. Don't touch them. Just ask and remember, and come tell me. Two things. Can you walk? Where does it hurt? Go. And Becca went, phone in her pocket, both hands free, a job in her head. And just like that, the slow old woman on aisle 9 had a triage runner, and the field was beginning, very slightly, to come under a kind of order, the first faint order it had had since the world tore in half, and not one person on that floor yet knew her name or her history or the meaning of the strap. They only knew, in the animal way, that there was suddenly a center to the room, a still point, a voice that was not afraid, and they began, without deciding to turn toward it. Tom came back half carrying the man with the arm, and Maggie went down on both knees beside them before they had even settled, her old knees screaming and her not hearing them. Because that is the other thing the training does. It puts the pain in a drawer and shuts it until later. The man was maybe 35, gray with shock, and his right forearm was wrong, opened along the inside where a piece of the window or the shelving had caught him, and it was bleeding the way. That means an artery, not a slow welling, but a steady, insistent pulse of bright red that came in time with his heart, spreading dark on the polished floor, and a wound like that on a big adult man empties him in minutes, not hours, minutes. And there is exactly one thing on God's earth that stops it, and she already had her hand in her apron pocket. She did not decide to reach for the strap. Her hand was there before the thought, the way your hand is on the rail before you know you have stumbled. 40 years of muscle reaching past 61 years of fatigue, and the faded olive tourniquet came out of her pocket and into the light, and Tom stared at it like she had pulled a live bird out of her apron. And Maggie was already talking, low and steady, to the bleeding man whose eyes were starting to roll. Look at me. Hey, eyes on me. You're going to feel this and it's going to hurt, and that's good. The hurt means it's working. You stay with me. And she slid the strap up high on his arm, above the wound, high and tight the way the dead and the living had taught her, and she fed the end through the buckle, and she pulled it down hard, harder than a person who had not done this would ever dare to pull, and then she took the short metal rod and she began to twist. This was the motif of her whole life, if a life can have a motif, this exact motion, the turning of that rod, and she had turned it on a riverbank, and turned it in the back of a moving truck, and turned it in the dark by feel alone, and her thumb found the worn place on the metal where her own grip over decades had polished it smooth, and she turned it until the bright pulsing red slowed and stuttered and stopped, and the only sound from the wound was nothing, beautiful nothing, and she locked the rod off against its catch, and she looked at her watch, an old plain watch with a real second hand, and she said out loud, to no one, to herself, to the part of her that kept the records, tourniquet, right arm, 0941, because you always note the time, always. A tourniquet is a clock starting, and the next people need to know when it started. And Tom, kneeling there, heard a 61-year-old grocery stocker call out a time of application like a woman reading scripture, and something in his face changed, the first of many faces that would change that morning, the dawning understanding that whoever this was, she was not what the apron said she was. Tom, she did not look up. He stays sitting up, back against that post, and you stay with him, and you watch that arm, and if you see red, any red, you call me, you yell, you do not move that strap. Do you understand me? Do not loosen it no matter what he says. He's going to start feeling better in a minute, and he's going to want you to loosen it, and you say no. You're his guy now. What's his name? She finally glanced at the bleeding man. Marcus, he managed. Tom's your guy now, Marcus. You're not going anywhere. And she was already rising, already turning, already scanning for the next one, leaving behind her a frozen bystander who was now a posted sentry over a stabilized patient, and a dying man who was no longer dying, and she had spent perhaps 90 seconds, and she had 4 dozen people to go. If you have made it this far into Maggie's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I have been waiting to tell you. Because up to now, you have seen a competent woman doing a hard thing well, and that is something, but it is not yet the thing. The thing is what she figures out in the next 4 minutes, the two truths that land on her almost at once, kneeling in the smoke, and change everything she thought this morning was, and there is no way you walk away from this story once you have heard them. Becca came back at a half run, breathless, and she did the thing Maggie had hoped she would do. She gave the report in the order she had been asked, no editorializing, just the facts. By the bread, there's 4. One older lady can't walk, says her hip, but she's talking fine. She's mad. She wants her purse. One guy can't really talk right. He keeps trying to stand up and falling. There's blood in his hair. A lady with a baby. And here Maggie's whole body did a thing, a tightening, because the training has one override and it is small and helpless people. The baby's okay, the baby's fine. The mom won't put it down, but she's holding her own side and there's blood coming through her fingers. And one man just sitting, not bleeding that I could see, but he's gray and he's sweating and he keeps rubbing his left arm and he says it's nothing. Maggie's eyes sharpened. Bright morning, blast, dust, and a gray sweating man clutching his left arm who says it's nothing. That was not a blast injury. That was a heart. The shock of the morning shoving an already bad heart over the edge, and a heart will kill him quieter and faster than any of the loud bleeding ones. And this was why you needed a person and not a system, because a system sends the ambulances to the screaming and the dramatic and the obviously broken, and the man dying quietest of all sights in the corner saying it's nothing until he isn't anything, and only a trained eye that has learned to distrust the loud and respect the quiet would have caught him. Becca, the gray man with the arm, he is now the most important person in this building, and you are going to go sit with him, and you are going to keep him sitting down and calm, and you are going to be very boring and very kind, and you are not going to let him stand up, and the second he stops talking to you, you scream for me. Go, run. And so it spread. The order, outward from the still point, one frozen person at a time turned into a working person, one loud wound traded for the awful arithmetic of the quiet ones, and Maggie Hale moved through the wreckage of the front end on her ruined knees, and she began, properly now, to triage, which is the thing she was put on the earth to do, and the thing the earth had spent 40 years pretending it did not need. She went down the field and she sorted them, not by who frightened her most or whose face she could not bear, but by the cold, clean logic of who would die in the next few minutes without help, and who would die in the next hour, and who would, no matter what anyone did, probably die, and who, thank God, would live whether she got to them or not, and could therefore wait. That last category is the secret weight of triage, the one nobody talks about, the people you walk past on purpose because they are well enough to be left, while they cry out and reach for you, and you keep walking because your hands belong to the ones who cannot cry out, and Maggie had made her peace with that arithmetic in a place with a different colored sky, and she made it again now, on a Saturday, in the country she had come home to, walking past a man with a broken wrist who was begging her to look at it so she could reach a woman 30 feet away who had stopped begging for anything at all. The broken wrist man was named Howard, she would learn later, a retired bus driver who had come in for coffee filters, and he was 68 and frightened, and his wrist was bent in a way that would have made a younger person faint, and he caught her sleeve as she passed and said, "Please, ma'am, it's broken. I can see the bone, please." And everything kind in Maggie wanted to stop, because that is what kindness wants. It wants to comfort the one in front of you who is asking. But triage is not kindness exactly. Triage is kindness with arithmetic laid over the top of it, kindness forced to count, and the cruelest truth she had ever learned, the one that had taken her years to stop fighting, was that the people who can still grab your sleeve and beg are, by the very fact that they can, not the ones who will die in the next 4 minutes. A broken wrist screams. A broken wrist does not kill. So she did the hardest thing a healer ever does, which is to look a frightened, begging human being in the eye and tell him no, and she crouched for exactly 2 seconds, just long enough to take his good hand and put it under his hurt one and say, "Howard, hold it just like this, against your chest. I know it hurts. I know, and I promise you it is not going to kill you, and that is why I have to go help the people it might. You are going to be all right. Hold it right there and breathe." And she left him, holding his own broken wrist, frightened but alive and going to stay that way, and she carried the weight of his frightened face with her to the next patient and the next, the way she carried all of them, because the ones you leave are heavier than the ones you save. They always have been. She reached the man with blood in his hair, the one Becca had said could not talk right, and kept trying to stand and falling, and that one worried her in a different way, because a head that makes a person confused and unsteady is a head that is bleeding inside, and there is nothing two hands on a grocery floor can do about a brain bleed except the one thing that matters, which is keep him from making it worse. He was a big man, 50s, and he kept surging up onto his feet with the blind animal insistence of the concussed and then going down again, and each fall was his head hitting the floor again, compounding the thing already wrong inside it. So she did not try to treat him. She managed him. She got down low and got into his field of vision and used the voice, the calm, cutting voice, and she got two of the steadier walking wounded, a husband and wife who had only scratches, and she gave them the single job of sitting on either side of him, not restraining him, just being there, hands light on his shoulders, talking to him low, keeping him down and keeping him still, and she logged him, head injury, altered, keep supine, and moved on, having spent 90 seconds turning a man who was beating his own brain against the floor into a man lying still between two strangers who would keep him alive by doing almost nothing, which is sometimes the whole art of it, knowing when almost nothing is the most that can be done. This was the part the movies never show, the part Brett Coyle could not have imagined from his glass office, that the genius of it was not heroics, it was sorting. It was the ruthless, ongoing triage of attention itself, deciding second by second where her hands and her voice would do the most good and refusing to spend them where her heart wanted them spent. She had a finite number of minutes and a finite number of hands and an almost infinite quantity of need, and the only thing that made the math survivable was the discipline she had bought with 40 years and a friend's life. The discipline to be guided by the cold arithmetic and not by the loudest cry. And she moved through that store, applying it the way a surgeon applies a blade, precisely, unsentimentally, and with a love so deep underneath it that it could afford to look like coldness on the surface. The bystanders watched her do it and did not understand what they were seeing. They thought they were watching a calm woman help people. They were watching a master practice the hardest version of her craft under the worst conditions it can be practiced in, and getting it right over and over, while the smoke thickened and the minutes bled away. It was the woman with the side wound, the mother Becca had described, and Maggie reached her and went down beside her, and saw at once that this was a real one, a serious one, the woman pale and clammy and her breathing too fast and shallow and her hand pressed white-knuckled over her lower ribs with the dark seeping steady between her fingers, and the baby, the actual infant, was somehow fine, fussing but fine, cradled in the woman's other arm, and the woman would not let it go, would not, even now, and Maggie did not fight her for it. She just needed the wound. So she said, "I've got you. I've got the baby. The baby's safe. I just need to see your side. That's all. Let me see." And she peeled the woman's hand back gently and looked, and it was bad, but it was workable. It was the kind of thing you packed and held and got to a surgeon. It was an hour wound, not a minute wound if she could keep the pressure on, and she was already reaching for something to pack it with. And that was the instant the first of the two truths landed on her, because she looked up out of reflex, the way you do, toward the ceiling, toward the place where the help should already be coming from, and there was nothing there. No sprinklers, no alarm, no recorded voice. The store had been ripped half open and was smoking near the registers, and there was not so much as a single ringing bell, and in the part of her brain that kept the field map she had assumed, without examining it, that somewhere a system was working, that fire trucks were already rolling because a panel somewhere had screamed the moment the blast hit, that this was a holding action, that she only had to keep these people alive for the 8 or 10 minutes until the cavalry arrived. And now, looking at a dead, dry, silent ceiling, she understood that she had assumed wrong. There had been no scream. The panel was dark. She had walked past it on the way up, and her eye had caught it, and her mind had filed it, and only now did the file open. The fire panel, dark, a small, steady amber light on it, the light that means bypass, the light that means someone has switched this system off and never switched it back on. Nobody had called anyone. The only reason help was coming at all was that a blast that size makes its own phone calls. People outside, people in the parking lot, somebody had surely dialed, but that was minutes ago at best, and the response was not staged and not waiting. It was just now leaving a station across town, and the 8 to 10-minute holding action she had been running in her head was actually a 20-minute one, maybe more. 20 minutes with no water on the fire and no system and no backup, and a building full of the down and the dying, and it was hers, all of it, every second of it, alone. She did not waste a breath on the why of it, not then, not while her hands were full of a bleeding mother, but the why arrived anyway, uninvited, the way the worst understandings do, because she knew this store and she knew the man who ran it. She knew the bread bake tripped the alarm, and she had heard him complain about it, heard him say to the assistant manager with that easy laugh that he'd had it handled so it would quit costing him mornings. She had not thought about it again. Why would she? But now, kneeling in the wreckage with the proof of it in the dark amber light above her, she understood that the same instinct that had cut her hours, the same reflex that looked at a slow old woman and saw only a number that did not support her, the same contempt for anything that cost money without showing up on a screen, that exact instinct had reached up a month ago and switched off the thing that was supposed to save these people, because the warning was inconvenient, because the warning was annoying, because a man who has never in his life had to make a 4-second decision that mattered cannot tell the difference between a nuisance and a lifeline. Brett Coyle had spent 3 months making warnings stop, and the warnings had stopped. And now there was no warning and no system and no help and no time. There was only the thing he had decided 4 months ago that the store did not need, the slow, expensive old woman kneeling in the blood who turned out to be the entire emergency response of that building, the whole of it, the alpha and the omega, because systems fail and people save people, and she had known that her whole life, and she had never in 40 years needed to know it more than she needed to know it now, so she changed her plan in the space of one breath the way you do, downward, grimmer, more honest, not a holding action, a long siege. Ration the hands, ration herself, do not burn out on the loud ones, hold the line, keep the savable alive long enough, and accept, the way she had accepted before, that she would not save all of them, that some were already past saving, and some would slip away while her hands were elsewhere, and that the measure of this morning would not be a clean number of lives, but the far harder thing, the most lives possible given what there was, which was almost nothing, which was her. She packed the mother's side with a folded apron and took the woman's own free hand and pressed it down over the pack and said, "Right here, hard as you can. Don't let up. You hold this and I keep the baby safe. That's the deal. That's your job. You keep yourself here for this one." And she nodded at the infant, and the mother, who had nothing left, found something, because Maggie had given her a reason that was bigger than her own pain, and that too was a 40-year-old skill, knowing that a person will hold on for someone they love long after they would have let go for themselves. And it was right then, at the lowest point, with the truth of the dead system sitting cold in her stomach, that the second thing happened, the thing that would be told and retold in that town for years, the moment the room found out who she was. Rosa had come up from the registers. Rosa, 54, who had been thrown to the floor behind her checkout and had a gash on her forearm she had not even noticed yet. Rosa, who could read a person across a room, had gotten up and come looking not for the exit, but for Maggie, because some part of Rosa had always known, and she found her kneeling over the mother, and she dropped down to help, and as Maggie reached across to steady the apron pack, her left sleeve, the gray collared shirt, dragged back from her wrist, and there in the hard sideways daylight pouring through the broken wall it showed, the thing she kept covered, the faded tattoo on the inside of her forearm, blurred to the color of an old bruise, the unit and the numbers, and above it the thin white line of the scar, and Rosa saw it, and Rosa's eyes moved from the tattoo to Maggie's hands, those calm, certain hands doing impossible things in the middle of hell, and back to the tattoo, and Rosa said, very quietly, almost to herself, in a voice full of a kind of awe and a kind of grief, "Maggie, oh my God, you were a combat nurse." And Maggie, who never explained herself, who had let them call her grandma and slow and finished for 4 months and not corrected a single one of them, did not look up from the wound. She just gave the count, flat and clipped and automatic, the way she would have given it to a surgeon stepping off a helicopter, because Rosa was here now, and Rosa was smart, and the field needed a second set of eyes that understood, 2 immediate, one's a tourniquet at 0941, and one's a chest I haven't reached, 4 delayed, 1 possible cardiac sitting up by the freezer that I'm worried about more than any of the bleeders, 3 I've walked past because they'll keep, and 2 I think are already gone but I haven't confirmed. We've got no alarm and no sprinklers and probably 20 minutes to first units. Wash that arm of yours later. I need you on the cardiac. Go." And Rosa stared at her for 1 heartbeat, the whole 4 months of the slow, invisible old woman rearranging itself in her head into something else entirely, and then she said, "Yes, ma'am," and she went, and that was the moment. That was the hinge of the whole morning. The instant the store stopped seeing a grandmother and started seeing a commander, and not one of them, not Rosa, not Tom, not Becca, not the gray frozen manager who was about to come down those stairs, would ever be able to unsee it again. Brett Coyle came down from the glass office into a world that no longer ran on the things he was good at. He had felt the blast up there, felt the building jump, and he had frozen at his desk for a span of seconds that he would never tell anyone about, staring at the labor screen while the floor below him came apart, his whole competent, ordered universe of metrics and margins gone meaningless in an instant. And then he had come down the stairs on legs that did not feel like his, into the smoke and the noise, and he had stood at the bottom with his clipboard, his actual clipboard still in his hand, a 44-year-old man in a crisp white shirt and a tie, utterly and completely without a single idea of what to do. He was not a coward, not exactly. He was something more common and more useless in that moment. He was a man whose entire skill set was for a world that was not on fire. He could cut a schedule and read a P&L and intimidate a regional rep, and he could not, to save his life or anyone else's, look at 40 wounded human beings and know where to begin, and the not knowing was eating him alive. He could feel the panic coming up his throat, and his eyes went around that ruined store looking for someone in charge, looking for the authority, looking for the system. And the system, dark and amber and silent on the wall, was the one he himself had switched off, and the only authority in that building was kneeling in the blood in a dark green apron with her first name on a strip of tape, giving orders that people were obeying. He went toward her because there was nowhere else to go. He came up behind her and he opened his mouth, and what came out was the reflex of a man reaching for the only tool he had, the tool of his title, and he said, "Margaret, what? Somebody needs to. I'm going to need everyone to stay calm, and we need to. The procedure, there's a binder, the emergency binder is in the." And Maggie, without turning around, without 1 ounce of heat, the way you would redirect a child who has wandered into a kitchen full of hot pans, said, "Brett, the binder won't help us. I will tell you exactly what to do, and you are going to do it, and you are going to do it fast, and that is how you help these people right now. Can you do that?" And there was a silence, 2 seconds, the longest 2 seconds of Brett Coyle's life, in which every assumption he had made about the slow, expensive old woman he had cut to 3 shifts turned over in the wreckage of his certainty and showed its other side, and he heard himself say, in a small voice that did not sound like the voice he used in meetings, "Yes, yes, okay, tell me." And she did, because she did not have time to make him feel his humiliation, and because, unlike the version of him that had stood in that office and let the word pace hang in the air, she took no pleasure in it at all. A frozen man with 2 working hands is not an enemy in a mass casualty event. He is a resource, and Maggie Hale had never in her life wasted a resource. "You know this building better than anyone here," she said, and it was true, and it was also exactly the thing to say to a drowning man. Hand him the one rope he can actually hold. "I need 3 things, and I need them in order. First, that fire by the registers. Is it spreading or is it dying? Don't guess. Go look. And if there's an extinguisher on the wall and the fire is small, you use it, and if it is bigger than you are, then you leave it and you come straight back. You do not be a hero. You just tell me. Second, I need water, bottled water, cases of it from aisle 6. As much as 2 people can carry brought right here because I have wounds to clean and people going into shock who need to be warm and flat. Third, the loading dock, the big doors in the back, I need them open and I need a clear path from this spot to those doors. Carts moved, everything moved, because in a few minutes people are going to come through those doors with stretchers and they cannot be climbing over your displays to reach us. Fire, water, a clear road to the back. Go in that order. Move." And Brett Coyle, who 20 minutes earlier had been the most powerful person in that building, ran to go look at a fire because a 61-year-old stock clerk had told him to, and for the first time in his professional life he was, in the only way that mattered that morning, useful. She got to the chest wound next, the one she had logged and not yet reached, a man in his 60s, heavy set, who had been near the front when it went and had caught something in the chest. And she knew before she was all the way down beside him that this was the hard one, the one that would test everything, because he was working too hard to breathe, his chest heaving and his lips going the wrong color, and a small wound high on the left side of his chest that bubbled faintly with each breath, sucking. And she had seen this. She had seen exactly this more times than she wanted to count. The chest wall opened so the lung could not pull properly, and the fix for it in a place with no equipment was old and crude, and it worked, and her hands were already moving, finding the wrapper from a snack package in the debris, the plastic, anything airtight, and she sealed it over the wound and taped 3 sides and left the 4th open. The way you do so the air could get out but not in, a one-way door for a chest, a trick older than she was, and she put the man's hand on it and told him to keep it there and told him to slow his breathing to match hers, in and out, in and out, and she breathed with him until the terrible heaving eased just slightly, just enough, and his color came back from the edge it had been going over, and she logged it, flat, to the record keeper in her skull chest seal, left 0948, and she moved on because she could not stay, because staying with one is how you lose 3, and that was the cruelest math of all, and she had never stopped hating it even as she obeyed it. The morning became a kind of terrible rhythm then, a rhythm she knew in her bones, the rhythm of holding a line that wants to break. She moved between her sentinels and her patients in a tightening circuit, checking the tourniquet on Marcus's arm, where Tom stood guard, white-faced but holding, checking the gray cardiac man where Becca sat being boring and kind exactly as instructed, checking the mother holding her own side for her baby, checking the chest seal, around and around, and at each station she made one small correction and gave one small word and moved on. And the corrections were the difference between life and death, and the words were the difference between panic and calm, and she ran them both at once, the medicine and the morale, because in a room with no system, those are not 2 jobs, they are 1. Rosa worked the cardiac man and then a scalp laceration, and then helped Maggie roll an unconscious woman onto her side so she would not choke. And Rosa was good. Rosa had the thing you cannot teach, the steadiness, and Maggie felt the relief of not being entirely alone that she had not felt in 40 years, the specific relief of having one other competent person in the chaos, and the 2 women, the cashier and the stalker, the 2 the store had paid the least and valued the least, held that front end together with their hands while the man in the tie ran their errands. Brett came back from the fire with a report and a question in his face, and to his credit, he gave the report the way she had asked, facts first, no panic. It's by the registers, in the wall where the line comes in. I hit it with the extinguisher and it knocked it down, but it's not out. It keeps coming back, small, but it keeps coming back, and there's more smoke than there was. And Maggie heard the part under the part, the thing he did not have the experience to name but had the sense to be afraid of. A fire fed from a gas line does not go out when you spray it. It goes out when someone shuts the gas, and nobody in that building knew how to shut the gas. And so the fire would keep coming back, patient as the smoke, and the smoke was the real enemy now, not the flame. She made the calculation fast. The smoke was low and gray and growing, and her patients were on the floor where the air was worst, and she could not move all of them, and she could not put out the fire, and she could not wait 20 minutes for people who could, and so she made the call that triage always comes down to in the end, the call about time, and she said, "Then we have less time than I thought. Brett, the front doors and that whole front wall are open air now. That's our good air. I want everyone who can be moved without killing them, moved toward the front gap and the open doors, low, on the floor, into the fresh air, and the ones who can't be moved, we keep as low as we can, and we get them out first when the trucks come. The smoke is the clock now. Everything just got faster." And it did. Everything got faster, and she got faster with it, and she did not let the new fear show on her face by so much as a flicker, because the moment the room saw fear on her face, the room was lost, and she knew that. It was the oldest rule she had. The leader's face is the last thing that is allowed to break. She moved her whole operation, in those next minutes, toward the light and the open air at the front. A slow, grim migration of the wounded across a wrecked floor. Brett and Rosa and the steadier bystanders dragging and carrying and half lifting under her direction, and she choreographed it the way she had choreographed casualty movements before, the sickest first, the airway cases positioned just so. Nobody moved who would die from the moving, and all of it in a haze that stung the eyes and coated the throat, and through all of it she kept up the circuit, the tourniquet, the chest seal, the cardiac, the mother, around and around, recounting, reassessing, because triage is not a thing you do once, it is a thing you do continuously. The dying change categories minute by minute, and the only way to catch a delayed patient sliding into immediate is to keep going back, keep counting, keep your hands moving and your eyes open and your fear in the drawer where it belongs. She had not stopped moving in 15 minutes. Her knees had passed beyond pain into a kind of distant roar she had decided to deal with tomorrow. And still she counted, and still she sorted, and still the calm, cutting voice went out over the smoke and the fear and held 40 frightened people inside an order they did not understand and could not have made for themselves. But a line that is held is still a line under pressure, and the pressure found the weak point, the way it always does. Becca screamed, not the cardiac man, thank God, but from across the floor a new voice, a man who had been one of the walking wounded, one of the ones Maggie had tallied as fine and left, had sat down against a fallen shelf to rest, and only now, minutes later, had the slow leak in his leg announced itself. A deep gash on the inside of the thigh that had been seeping quietly under his jeans, and had now, as he shifted, opened into the same bright, pulsing red she had stopped in Marcus's arm, the high-pressure kind, the minutes not hours kind, and there was a spreading dark stain under him, and his face was going the gray of a man bleeding out, and he did not even understand yet that he was in danger. And Maggie's hand went to her apron pocket out of pure reflex, and the pocket was empty, because the one tourniquet she owned, the faded olive strap that was older than anyone in the building, was cinched around Marcus's arm 30 feet away and could not come off, would kill Marcus if it came off. And for one single half-second, Margaret Hale, who had answers for everything, had no tool for the thing in front of her. And then she did, because the lesson under all the other lessons was that the tool is never the thing, the tool is just a thing. And she had improvised tourniquets out of belts and rifle slings and torn shirts in places where the proper ones had run out long ago, and she stripped off her own dark green apron in one motion and rolled it on the bias into a tight band. Fast, her hands a blur of 40-year memory, and she looked up, and the nearest set of hands was a kid frozen 10 feet away, and it was Dylan. It was the boy who had called her grandma that very morning, who had clipped her heel with his cart, who had filmed himself by the dairy case while she stocked her cans, and he was standing there now, ashen and shaking and useless, and 22 years old, in the middle of the worst thing he had ever seen. And Maggie did not have a single second to spend on what had passed between them, and so she spent none. "Dylan!" His head snapped up at his name. "Get down here. Now, hands. I need your hands." And he came, stumbling, because a clear voice in a nightmare pulls you like gravity, and she put his 2 shaking hands flat into the man's groin crease, high on the leg, above the wound, and she pressed them down with her own, and she said, "Push, hard, with your whole body. Lean on it. You cannot hurt him. You can only help him. Push until I say stop." And the boy pushed, weeping, and the bright flow slowed under the pressure of his own 2 hands, and in the 4 seconds that bought her, she got the rolled apron around the leg above his hands and pulled it down savage tight, and used a pricing marker from the floor, a hard plastic stick, as a windlass, sliding it under the band and twisting, the same motion as the rod, the same motion as her whole life, turning and turning until the red stopped, and she tied the marker off so it could not unwind, and only then did she let Dylan lift his hands, and he stared at his own red palms like they belonged to someone else, and Maggie looked him dead in the eye and said the only thing there was time to say, which was also somehow everything. You just saved his life. Stay on this. You're his guy now." And the boy who had called her grandma at 9 that morning nodded and put his red hands back on the strap to hold it steady and did not leave that man's side for the next 40 minutes and grew up entirely in the space of one of them. And kneeling there in the smoke, watching a frightened young man hold a stranger's life shut with his own 2 hands because she had shown him how, Maggie heard a voice she had not heard in 40 years, clear as if the woman were crouched right beside her. It was Lena. There was a letter Maggie kept folded in a box at home, a letter written long ago by the friend who had taught her this exact work at a table under a different sky, the friend who had not come home, and Maggie knew it by heart, and one line of it rose up in her now unbidden, the way the dead speak to us at the worst moments in their own stubborn words. "The day will come when the room has forgotten everything we know, and on that day you will be the only one left who remembers, and you will save them." That was the whole reason she had carried the strap into a grocery store every single shift for 4 months, while they laughed and called her grandma. Not to be ready for herself, to be ready for them, for this room, this morning, these strangers reaching for soup. Lena had been right. Lena had been right for 40 years, and Maggie, with the dead woman's voice in her ear and the dead woman's strap multiplied across that floor in the hands of the living, kept working and did not let herself cry, not yet, because the crying was for later and the work was for now. That was the high water mark of what skill and nerve could do, and it was not enough to save everyone, because nothing ever is, and the morning made her pay the price it always made her pay. One of the 2 she had marked as probably already gone, a man who had been closest to the blast, she confirmed in passing with 2 fingers at his throat and a held breath of her own, and there was nothing, and there had been nothing for a while, and she closed his eyes with her thumb and forefinger the way she had closed too many, gently, a small precise tenderness in the middle of all that speed, and she said nothing, and she let herself feel nothing. Not yet, because the feeling would come later, and it would come for years, and she knew that, and she paid it forward into the future the way she always had, on credit, so that her hands could keep working now. And the other one, the one she had hoped against hope might be only unconscious, was gone too, and she confirmed that one as well, and that was 2. 2 souls in that store who had been reaching for groceries an hour ago and were now beyond any hand, hers or anyone's, and the unfairness of it, the sheer stupid waste of it, a gas line and a switched-off alarm and a busy Saturday, sat in her chest like a stone she would carry out of that building and never quite set down. But here is the thing the arithmetic also said, the thing she made herself hold on to even as she closed those eyes, because despair is a luxury that kills the living. 2 gone, and the rest were still here. The man with the arm, the man with the chest, the man with the leg, the mother and her baby, the cardiac who had not coded, the scalp wounds and the broken bones and the dazed and the deafened, dozens of them, sorted and held and stabilized and waiting, alive, every one of them alive in a building with no system and no help and no time, held together for 20 long minutes by a woman the store had decided was finished, and by a cashier and by a manager carrying water, and by a boy with red hands who had finally understood what the strap in her pocket had always meant. And somewhere out past the broken front wall, getting louder, came the first of the sirens. They came through the broken front and the propped loading doors at almost the same moment, the first cruise, and there is a particular way a scene like that goes when the professionals arrive, a dangerous seam in it that costs lives if it is handled wrong. The handoff, the moment when the people who have been holding the line meet the people who are taking it over, and in most disasters, that seam is chaos, 2 systems colliding, nobody knowing who has what, patience lost in the translation. Maggie had been on both sides of that seam in her life, and she knew exactly how to make it clean. And so when the lead paramedic came through, a composed woman in a dark uniform and a reflective vest with an equipment bag over one shoulder and the unmistakable flat-fast eyes of someone scanning a field, Maggie did not run to her babbling like a victim. She walked to her, met her at the edge of the wreckage, and gave her the report. "Bystander triage, I've been the only medical for about 20 minutes," she said, and her voice had a particular cadence to it, the handoff cadence, dense and ordered and stripped of everything but what the next person needed, and the paramedic's eyes came up off the field and locked on to her. Because that cadence is a password. You cannot fake it. It tells another professional in 3 seconds that the person in front of you knows exactly what they are doing. I've got 2 immediate that need to move first. Tourniquet on a right arm, time of application 0941, that's a real one. Store-bought, do not loosen it in here. Improvised tourniquet on a left thigh, applied roughly 0956. Windlass is a plastic marker. It's holding, but I want eyes on it the second you can. Tension risk on a chest, left side. I put a vented seal on at 0948 and he's holding, but he'll need a needle. A cardiac sitting up by the freezer, 60-ish, never coded, but he's the one I'd put in your first truck if it were me, because he's the one most likely to crash quiet. 4 delayed, stable, packed and pressured, they can wait. Walking wounded I've sent to the back lot, and I've got 2 deceased, confirmed, both near the seat of the blast. They're under the blue tarp so the others wouldn't see. They can be last, she breathed. That's the field. The paramedic looked at her for a moment, one professional reading another, and then she did the thing that was the whole vindication of the morning, the thing that landed harder than any apology from Brett Coyle or any wide-eyed stare from Dylan ever could, because it came from someone who knew, someone qualified, someone whose recognition meant something. She stopped treating Maggie like a civilian. She nodded once, fast, and she said, "Copy all, the way you say it to appear," and she keyed her radio and she relayed Maggie's triage, almost word for word, to the units stacking up outside, the immediates and the delayed and the deceased, and then she turned back and she said, "Who packed the chest? That's Seal's textbook." And Maggie said, "I did." And the paramedic's eyes moved just for a second, the way Rosa's had, down to the forearm where the sleeve had stayed pushed back and the old tattoo showed in the daylight, and back up, and something passed across her face, not surprise exactly, more like the click of a thing making sense, and she said quietly, just between the 2 of them, "Where'd you serve?" And Maggie told her, 3 words, "The unit and nothing else." And the younger woman went still for a half-second in the middle of all that noise and said, "My instructor talked about your collection point in a class as an example of how it's supposed to be done." And that was it. That was the entire vindication. 4 sentences in the middle of a disaster. No crowd, no applause, no slow clap. Just one expert telling another, in passing, that her worst day 40 years ago was now taught to the young as the standard. And Maggie Hale, who had let a whole store call her finished, felt something go very quiet and very steady behind her eyes, and she said, "Then you know what to do. Let's move these people." And they did. The paramedic knelt by the man with the improvised tourniquet, the apron, and the pricing marker, and she examined the field expedient work the way a craftsman examines another craftsman's joinery, and she said, half to herself, "Whoever did this saved his leg and his life." And she did not change it, because there was nothing to improve. She only stabilized it for transport, and the rolled green apron with its plastic windlass went out the door on a stretcher exactly as Maggie had tied it. A piece of 40-year-old knowledge improvised in 4 seconds out of the cheapest thing in the building, carrying a stranger's life out into the daylight. And Dylan, who had held that leg for 40 minutes, walked alongside the stretcher to the door because he could not make himself let go until the professionals had it, And when they took it from him, he stood there with his red hands hanging at his sides, and he looked back across the wrecked store at the gray-haired woman in the gray shirt, with no apron now, directing the flow of stretchers toward the back doors, and the look on his face was not something a person his age usually has to feel, the full weight of how completely and how cruelly wrong he had been about another human being, and it would change the shape of the rest of his life. That look, though neither of them knew it yet. The store emptied of its wounded the way it had filled with shoppers that morning, slow and then all at once, stretcher after stretcher, out the cleared path Brett Coyle had made, the immediates first exactly as she had ordered, Marcus with his arm, the man with his chest, the cardiac who had never crashed because a young woman named Becca had sat with him and been boring and kind, the mother carried out still holding her baby with her own hand pressed to her side because Maggie had given her a reason to hold on, all of them, out into the light and into the ambulances and away toward the surgeons who had finished what a stock clerk had started on a dirty floor with snack wrappers and an apron and a strap from her pocket. As the crews worked, the second wave of responders fanned out across the floor, and Maggie heard, in pieces, the way her work was landing on the people trained to judge it. A firefighter crouching by the chest seal patient said to his partner, not knowing she could hear, "Who put this on? This is field stuff. This is good." And his partner shrugged and tipped his head toward the gray-haired woman in the grocery shirt, and the firefighter looked at her for a long second with an expression she had seen exactly once before in her life, in the eyes of a young medic she had trained who had watched her do something he did not know was possible, and it was the look of a professional revising upward, in real time, his entire estimate of the person in front of him. A second paramedic, kneeling by the cardiac man whom Becca had babysat into survival, checked his rhythm and said quietly, "This one would have been dead if somebody hadn't kept him calm and flat. Who was on him?" And Becca, the young woman with the phone, the one who an hour ago had been filming, stood up shaking and pointed at Maggie and could not even speak. And the paramedic nodded, slow, and went back to his work. And another stranger in that store had just learned what Rosa had known for months. The recalibration moved through the room like a current, person by person, the bystanders and the crews and the wounded who were awake enough to understand, all of them quietly rearranging the slow old woman from aisle 9 into something none of them had a name for, and the strange thing, the thing that told you everything about who she was, is that Maggie did not notice it happening because she was not watching them watch her. She was watching her patients. She was still counting. She would be counting in her sleep that night and for many nights after. Rosa told it later, to anyone who would listen, and she told it the same way every time because she had been there and she could not stop seeing it. She said the thing nobody believed until she made them believe it was how quiet it had been. Not the blast. The blast was loud, but after, the work itself, how Maggie had run the worst scene any of them would ever see in a voice barely above the one you would use to read a child to sleep, how she had never once raised it, never once panicked, never once stopped, how she had moved through bodies and blood and smoke with the awful, unhurried certainty of someone who had been to a worse place than this and come back, and how the whole store, frightened strangers who had never met, had bent toward that calm like plants bending toward a window and lived because of it. "I worked next to that woman for 4 months," Rosa would say, "and I bagged groceries beside her, and I never knew. None of us knew. And the worst part, the part I can't forgive us for, is that we decided we knew. We looked at her and decided, and we were so wrong it should scare every single one of us because how many of them are out there, the ones we've decided about, the ones carrying something we'll never see until the day we need it, and the people she told it to would go quiet every time because they would think of someone. Everyone always thinks of someone." And as the floor cleared and the urgency bled out of the room and the professionals took the weight, Margaret Hale began, for the first time in 25 minutes, to feel her knees. They walked her out last, or near last, because she would not go until she had personally told the lead paramedic where each of the deceased lay and confirmed that her two immediates were already rolling, and someone draped one of those thin silver blankets over her shoulders that she did not remember accepting, and she came out through the front of the store she had been stalking an hour before into a parking lot full of light and engines and noise, and they sat her on the open back step of an ambulance and put a cup of something warm in her lined hands, and a young EMT crouched to check her over, and found her hands were steady, perfectly steady, and her blood pressure was fine, and her eyes were clear, and the only thing wrong with her was that she was 61 years old and had just done the work of an entire trauma team on a concrete floor. And the EMT, who was maybe 25, looked at this calm, gray-haired woman in a grocery shirt and could not put it together, and finally just said, "Ma'am, are you a nurse or something?" And Maggie looked out at the wrecked storefront and the stretchers and the people her hands had kept in the world, and she thought about all the answers she could give and all the years behind each one, and she said simply, the way she said everything, "I used to be," which was true, and was not true, and was its own kind of answer. Brett Coyle found her there. He came across the lot still in his ruined white shirt with the tie pulled loose, and he had carried water and cleared a path and done, in the end, every single thing she had told him to do, and he stood in front of her not knowing how to begin, this man who always knew how to begin, and what he finally said was not an apology, not in words, because some things are too big for the small machinery of sorry. He said, "The fire panel. I'm the one who had it bypassed a month ago because of the bread alarm." He said it looking at the ground, and then he made himself look at her, which cost him something. You could see it cost him. If it had been on, they'd have known faster. Help would have come faster. Those two people, maybe, and he could not finish it, and he did not try to, and Maggie let the silence hold him the way the silence holds a man who is finally telling the truth. She did not absolve him. She was not going to lie to a man on the worst and most honest day of his life, but she was not cruel either, because cruelty is a luxury and she had spent her whole life unable to afford it. And so what she gave him was the only thing that was both true and survivable, which was the future. "Then you know now," she said, "what the warnings are for. Don't ever switch one off again, not one, for the rest of your life." And he nodded, and something in him that had been hard and certain and wrong for 44 years quietly broke and began, maybe, to grow back in a better shape, and he walked away across the lot slowly, a smaller man and possibly, in time, a better one, and the story let him go, because he was not the point. He had never been the point. The displaced rarely are. The point was sitting on the back step of an ambulance with a strap in the pocket of the apron she had given to a stranger's leg, except the apron was gone now, out the door on a stretcher, and so, for the first time in 4 months, Maggie's hands had nothing to reach for, and they sat empty in her lap. And that was almost the hardest part, the stillness after, the moment the drawer she had shut on all of it slid open, and the feeling she had paid forward came due, all at once, the two she had lost, and the smell and the noise and the weight of every decision, and her hands began, finally, very slightly, to shake, not in front of the patients, never in front of the patients, but here, after, alone, the way they always had, the way they had 40 years ago in a different country, and Rosa, who knew, who had always known, came and sat down beside her on the cold metal step and did not say anything at all, just sat, shoulder to shoulder, two underpaid women who had held a building full of the dying together with their bare hands, and after a while Rosa reached over and put her own steady hand over Maggie's shaking ones and held them still, and that was when Maggie remembered the letter. There was a letter that lived folded in a worn envelope at the bottom of the box on Maggie's dresser at home, the box where the tattoo's meaning was kept in paper, and she had not needed to read it in years because she knew it by heart, but she thought of it now, on the back of that ambulance, the way you think of a voice you miss. The strap had not always been hers. It had belonged to a woman named Lena, who had been her partner at the aid station 40 years before, a sharp-mouthed, loving terror of a nurse from a small town who had taught Maggie half of what her hands knew, and Lena had not come home. She had died doing the work, on a bad day Maggie did not talk about, and afterward, among the things that were sent back, there had been the strap, Lena's own field tourniquet, worn smooth at the windlass by Lena's own grip, and with it a short letter Lena had written to Maggie weeks before, the way they all wrote letters back then, the just-in-case kind to be opened only if, and Maggie had opened it only if, and the letter did not say the things you would expect. It did not say be brave or live well or any of the greeting card things. Lena had written in her slashing, impatient hand just a few lines, and the line that mattered, the line Maggie had carried for 40 years along with the strap, was this: "They will tell you it is over, Mags. Some day they will look at you and decide you are done, that what we know is old, that we are old. Let them. Carry the strap anyway. The day will come when the room has forgotten everything we know, and on that day you will be the only one left who remembers, and you will save them, and they will never understand why an old woman knew how. That is the secret. That is the whole secret. We do not do it to be thanked. We do it so that on the worst day, someone in the room knows what to do. Keep it in your pocket. You will know when." She had carried the strap into a grocery store every shift for 4 months because of those words, not as a keepsake, but as a readiness, a quiet promise to a dead friend that she would not let them make her forget what her hands knew. No matter how many Dylans called her grandma, no matter how many Brett Coyles cut her hours and let the word pace hang in the air, and that morning, on aisle 9, the day had come, exactly as Lena had said it would. The room had forgotten everything they both knew, and Maggie had been the only one left who remembered, and she had saved them, and not one of them had understood why an old woman knew how. Lena had been right about all of it. She had been right for 40 years. And sitting on the back step of that ambulance with Rosa's hand steadying her own, Maggie Hale, 61 years old, finally let herself cry, quietly, for the friend who had known, and for the 2 she had lost that morning, and for the strange long road that had taken her from a forward aid station to a checkout line to this. And Rosa held her hands and let her, and the ordinary world went on around them, engines and radios and a clear blue sky, indifferent and bright and full of people who would go home that night because of what those hands had done. They tried, in the days that came after, to make a thing of her. That is what the world does now. Someone had filmed pieces of it, of course, Becca's abandoned phone and others, and there was the kind of attention that comes, the local news, and then the wider kind, the headline writers reaching for the easy words hero and miracle, and a reporter found out about the unit and the tattoo and the collection point and wanted the whole story, the war and all of it, and Maggie gave them almost nothing because she had never done any of it to be seen, and she was not going to start now. She let them say she was a retired nurse. She let the rest stay in the pocket where it belonged. When they asked her how she had known what to do, she said only that she had had good teachers, and she meant Lena, and she did not explain. When they asked her how it felt to be called a hero, she said she did not think she was one, that a hero was a word for the people who do something nobody expects of them, and that she had only done the things she had been trained for 40 years to do, the things she had promised someone she would always be ready to do, and that the real story was not that one old woman remembered, but that a whole bright store full of decent people had been allowed to forget until it almost cost them everything. Nobody quite knew what to do with that answer. It did not fit the headline, so they ran the headline anyway, and Maggie let them and went back to work. The ones who came to find her were not the reporters, they were the others. Over the weeks that followed, in ones and twos, they came to the store, the people from that morning and the people who loved them, and they did not always know what to say, and so they brought things the way people do: a casserole, a card, a paper cup of good coffee set quietly on the break room table. And they would find her on aisle 9, and they would stand there a moment, and then they would say some version of the same thing, which was not really thank you, because thank you was too small, and they knew it. Marcus came, the man with the arm, and showed her the scar and the hand that still worked and could not finish his sentence. The mother came with the baby, healthy, growing, and put the child for one moment into Maggie's arms without a word, which said everything. Howard, the bus driver, came with his wrist in a brace and actually apologized for begging her to stay when she had needed to go, and she told him there was nothing on this earth to be sorry for, that begging to live is the most human thing there is, and that she had thought about his face every day since, and was so glad it was a face that got to keep going. They came, and Maggie received each of them with the same quiet she received everything, and she never once said that she had only done her job, because she knew that for them it had not been a job. It had been the line between the rest of their lives and the end of them, and to wave that off would have been a cruelty. So she just let them say their broken half-sentences and held their hands and let it matter, because letting it matter was the last gift she could give them, and the hardest, for a woman who had spent her whole life deflecting. And the cost was real, and she did not hide it from herself, because she never had. There were nights the smell came back, the dead flat nothing of air gone wrong, and she would wake with her hands already moving, already reaching for a pocket that was not there in the dark, and she would lie still and breathe the way she had taught 100 medics to breathe and wait for the worst country to recede. There were the two she had lost, and there always would be, 2 more faces added to the long roll she carried, and on the bad days she did the math again, the cold, useless, after-the-fact math. Was there a world where she reached them in time? And the honest answer, the answer Lena would have given her flat across a field table, was no, there was not. They were gone before she stood up, and knowing it did not make her carry them any lighter, it only made it possible to keep standing. That was the deal she had made long ago and made again now. You carry them. You do not get to set them down. And you keep your hands ready anyway, because the next one might be a save, and the saves are why you carry the rest. Because she did go back. That surprised people too. She did not take the offers that came, the speaking and the rest of it, and she did not retire to be admired from a distance. She put her apron back on, a new one, plain and dark green with her name on a real badge now, because Brett Coyle had ordered her one himself the first week the store reopened, and she went back to stocking shelves, slow and deliberate, square cans, labels out on the same aisle 9, in the same store, rebuilt and bright again. And the crew was different around her now, the way a crew is different after it has watched a person become who they really are. Dylan was still there. He had asked to keep working her shifts. He carried the heavy cases for her without being asked and without making a thing of it, and once, weeks later, quietly, by the dairy case where he had once filmed himself, he had asked her to teach him the real stuff, the pressure and the bleeding and the breathing, because he never wanted to stand frozen again while someone he could have helped bled on a floor. And Maggie had looked at him for a long moment, this boy who had called her grandma, and seen the man the morning had made of him, and she had said yes, and on their breaks she taught him, the same way Lena had taught her, and that, more than any headline, was the thing that made her feel that the morning had been worth its terrible price, that the knowledge had found someone younger to live in, that it would outlast her now, the way Lena's had outlasted Lena, passed hand to hand down a line of ordinary people who would each, some day, be the only one in the room who knew what to do. There is a thing that happens in that store now, in the last hour of a shift when the light comes golden low through the tall front windows, the same windows that came apart in glittering haze that morning and have long since been replaced, and the place is quiet, the last customers drifting out, the registers winding down. Maggie finishes her aisle. She squares the last can, and before she clocks out every single shift, she does one small thing that no one but Rosa and Dylan understands, and they understand it completely, and they never say a word about it. She reaches into the pocket of her apron and she takes out the strap. The faded olive strap, worn smooth at the windlass by two women's grips across 40 years and one impossible morning, the strap that was Lena's and is hers and will someday be Dylan's, and she turns it once in her lined hands, gently the way you greet an old friend, and she checks it, the fabric and the buckle and the rod, the way she has checked it 10,000 times, and then she slides it back into her pocket where it lives, ready for the next ordinary day that might not stay ordinary, and she clocks out and she goes home, an old woman who stocks shelves, carrying in one pocket the entire reason 40 people are alive. Because that is the thing the world keeps getting wrong. The thing it got wrong about Maggie Hale on aisle 9 and gets wrong every single day about the quiet, competent people it has decided are finished. Valor does not retire. It does not show up on a screen, and it does not announce itself, and it will let you call it slow and old and done for as long as you need to, and it will keep stocking your shelves and bagging your groceries and waiting, patient as a stone, in the pocket of someone you walked right past until the morning the room finally needs it. So here is what I will leave you with, the question I have been turning over since I first heard this story, and I would truly like to know how you land on it. If you had been in that store that morning, frozen in the aisle while the smoke came down, would you have been one of the ones who stood and stared, waiting for a system that was never coming to save you? Or would you have listened for the one calm voice in the chaos, the slow old woman with the strap in her pocket, and gone where she told you to go, and put your shaking hands where she told you to put them, and found out, the way Dylan did, who you really are when everything comes apart at once?